Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, a man who's about to say, like, thanks for the intro, babe.
Tim Longo.
Yes, I'm not sure whether that was in your version, now that I think about it.
I think it was. No, now
Okay.
that you're... where was it? It's ringing a bell.
The Lab 32 guy with the car that you race.
Oh, yes.
The rocket sled or whatever this is supposed to be.
Yeah. No, that he was there. Yep.
Okay, yeah. Classic character.
Hilarious.
He was something else. We are, of course, about to embark on Chrono Trigger, the first 5 or so hours of which we've played together. We've both played. A note in advance, and I kind of already touched on this, there are 2 official translations of this game. I am playing the original translation, the Woolsey translation. And Tim is playing
to a person, or what is the Woolsey? The word of the anyway.
That's the person. That was the translator.
Got it.
And you are playing the Slattery translation. So
okay,
which I don't know actually when those what versions those were made for. I mean, obviously the Woolsey was for the original US release. I don't know when the Slattery translation came in, but it is the one that is the more official one now. You are basically playing the Greedo shot first version, I guess.
Okay. Oh, interesting. So you're playing on PS3? What are you playing?
No, I'm playing on the Wii, which is an emulated SNES version. It's literally the old SNES ROM in an emulator. So, okay. I'm playing with the classic controller and everything. So it's nice to go back to that and play another 16-bit RPG. Let's hope my throat holds up. Okay,
yeah, you're a little gravelly there.
I'm already getting gravelly. It's been an interesting time. We are, of course, in the middle of the what we should refer to as the coronavirus. But I don't think I have it. I'm just sick with something else at the moment. So,
if only the virus created time warps for us to utilize, it would be much more interesting than what is happening.
Yeah, if I have a bad enough fever, it'll probably feel like time travel. But
yeah, that's true.
But I think I'll be all right. Some folks may be listening to this on the other side of it, and then to those folks who say welcome, I hope it's okay in your world. Anyway, 1995 is when this game came out. As we said last week on the pod, that podcast came out on the 25th anniversary to the day of this video game.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, March 11th of 1995, which is a year we've covered before. Dark Forces, I think, is the one game that we played that was actually exactly from this year, although we also played TIE Fighter, which had a sort of CD-ROM, enhanced, more voice talkie edition, and probably is the edition basically that we played of that game. I might as well hit the other LucasArts titles from that year: Full Throttle and The Dig, a couple of adventure games, and Phantasmagoria and I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream are another couple titles I picked out from back in the day, adventure games that I remember enjoying. Although I don't think I ever finished Phantasmagoria. I might have to go back to that one someday. Also, RPGs. There was an expansion for Warcraft 2 this year, Tides of Darkness, which I quite enjoyed, as well as the original Command & Conquer. So that's what was going on over on the PC. You got some console titles as well?
Yeah, we have various, as we were talking about in pre-show, this was sort of the last few years maybe of the SNES specifically. So that's, they did announce N64 this year at Space, what was it called?
SpaceWorld? Yeah.
Yeah, and then N64 came out the next year, but we have things like I saw Castlevania was on this list. One of the Dracula X, which was a port of Rondo of Blood, I think. Twisted Metal on PS1 had come out. And then there was a Kirby game I saw. Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island, which is beloved by some, by many, but Super Bomberman 3 on the SNES, Kirby's Dream Land 2 and Game Boy. So there's a few just to mention.
Also in the
you wanted to mention Earthbound, you said had come out this year too.
Yeah, Earthbound came out this year in the US, but also a couple other JRPGs, Dragon Quest VI, and Trials of Mana in the Mana series. I had to look that up. I was like, is this a Trials game or is this a Mana game? You probably don't know either of those series particularly well.
Well, there's the Tales.
I don't either, too. Actually. Yeah, and there's also the
Tales of Fantasia, which is part of the Tales series from Namco, came out on the SNES too. So
yeah, a lot of
what's going on?
A lot of titles, a lot of series titles, and probably at their peak, at least for the 16-bit era at the time. I mean, certainly of those, I've played Earthbound, and it is fantastic. Highly recommended.
Is that a Nintendo first-party game? I forget.
It is, yes, and it's great. I believe it is. It's also extremely difficult in terms of knowing where to go. They had to basically ship with the game in the US. They had to ship the cheat guide, the strategy guide. There's a very thick book that you get with it.
Oh, serious?
Yeah, it was that difficult.
That's crazy.
In the US, not in Japan, where the true gamers live.
Right.
You also pointed out, you mentioned Tokyo's SpaceWorld. I think it's Tokyo. It was also the year of the first E3, as you noted in. Yeah. And since last year was probably the last year of E3, it's kind of a nice circle.
Yeah, bookends. There you
go. Who knows? I'm saying that I'm being
no, you're not
snide. No, I know others are foretelling the death knell, but it has not died yet, and that one has tried to die several times. So we'll see. But it is probably canceled for good this year. So in the midst of all this, anyway, to the game itself. This has got an all-star cast of sort of creatives at the top of the project that I looked up and wanted to mention. It is the first time on the cast that we've played a game from the same sort of overall director or creator who's credited with the title, which in this case is Hironobu Sakaguchi, who's the director of the Final Fantasy series, of course, us having played Final Fantasy IX. But also Yuji Horii, who was a designer on the Dragon Quest series, may still be as far as I know, and Akira Toriyama, who was a manga artist. You had mentioned in pre-show the art direction. And he would have been sort of in that role. He's best known for his work on Dragon Quest as far as video games goes, but also for a little manga series called Dragon Ball, which you may have heard of. Oh,
right. Yeah. So that I'm looking at the cover again and I'm thinking about, we didn't talk about the intro of the intro movie. We should, in pre-show, we should hit that a little bit. I was surprised to see that. I wonder if you must have the same one, right? The fully animated sort of anime intro. Did you have that?
I don't think so.
Oh, what? That's why I was wondering.
Okay. I'll have to go and look. That's the sort of thing that I would skip through or not really pay much attention to. So
let's come back to it then. But my point being is that the character design, not in the game, but the art, the hand-drawn art for like the cover and that anime intro looks like both like Dragon Quest as well as Dragon Ball. Yeah, it looks like something out of Shonen Jump or whatever. Yeah, exactly. The humanoid sort of design. So I didn't know that was the same guy that has been doing a lot of that same stuff. So
yep. One more, a few more actually to mention. Masato Kato is a writer who is well known for Xenogears, popular old PlayStation 1, I believe, title, and some of Final Fantasy VII. Worked also on the Mana series, which we've already mentioned, and Shiren the Wanderer series, as well as the Ninja Gaiden series, or Gaiden, depending on how you pronounce that. And then finally, I don't think we'll talk about the music this time specifically, but I did want to mention the composers there. Yasunori Matsuda, primarily the composer on this game. The music is excellent. I'm sure we'll return to it in a later episode. But he got ill, I guess, towards the end of the project, and Nobuo Uematsu, I don't even know how to pronounce his name. Longtime Final Fantasy composer, Uematsu, I guess. He kind of finished off some final tracks. So a couple of really great composers on this as well. Really great team in the creative role.
Yeah, it seems like kind of like, as you're going through this, I'm kind of looking at each of them too, and it seems like when you look at each of their backgrounds, it's like a Square, super team, like Dream Team.
Oh yeah,
because of all the stuff they worked on before this,
and since. I mean, these are all people have had a huge influence on JRPGs, or just in the case of the writers and composers, just Japanese games in general. Fantastic sort of cultural icons, really. And you talk about somebody like Toriyama, in Dragon Ball, and that's still going. I mean, that had a big fighting game last year, and I think another game just came out a week or two ago. So that's not something I'm familiar with, really. But I know that it's got a lot of cultural cachet. I feel like that's something that maybe came to the States in the 90s. And so it missed me entirely because I'm too old. I mean, I'm too young for that.
Yeah, right.
But anyway, so 1995 from Square Enix, and just an absolutely fantastic group of collaborators, sort of at the top of it.
Yep.
So let's dig into the game proper. This is it starts. I mean, so we've already said it's a JRPG. I don't, somebody asked us to sort of talk more about how you're playing. So we should probably try to capture a little bit of what the game feels like starting out. And that's, sort of that top-down look that's pretty common in the 16-bit era. Character-based. You've got a single character you're driving around, who later will be followed by two others. And that sort of top-down, not exactly isometric, but that top-down style that you often see in the 16-bit era, all sorts of games of the time. But for us, also like Link to the Past would be another good example of the kind of the same basic style, although the tiles I think are smaller, maybe in that game. I don't remember exactly, but it felt like the characters were a little squashed compared to these.
For sure. Yeah, I think the sense of scale for any given screen was definitely it felt much bigger, like you're in a bigger space. And in Zelda, you're saying, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And once you make the characters larger, like they do in this game, so they're just choosing to render that differently. But I obviously for me, as most of the listeners know, I can't imagine maybe we'll have some new listeners on this episode because they're fans of the game, but not being a JRPG player, and really other than what we've played on the podcast, I've had very little experience with it. So I'm doing a lot of comparisons to Final Fantasy IX, which was the main one we've played. I also was reflecting on kind of like, for good reason, the sort of interesting set of JRPG-ish kind of games we've played on the podcast when I was looking back, because they're my main basis of comparison. So when you look at like Pokemon and Kingdom Hearts and Final Fantasy IX, they're not very similar games,
Right.
As far as like formulaic, it's not like we played an early Final Fantasy 16-bit before this or anything. So I have weird comparisons to make. And so when I look at 9 specifically, like to your point about like how the world is presented, and you're moving through the world in pretty real-time way. In fact, even your companions are following you around. I believe that, I'm forgetting, in 9 they didn't, right? They didn't follow you around that little.
No, you all kind of joined to be one character.
Yeah. One character. And I love the look of 9, and I did enjoy 9 quite a bit. They're in that realm between like 7, 8, and 9 of figuring out ways to combine real-time 3D characters with pre-rendered backgrounds. You know what I mean? And so there was always a little bit of like sort of dissonance between those two things. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
One was highly, highly rendered and beautiful, and it's a beautiful game. But then it was sometimes the characters really, because they were polygonal, would stand out, and
right.
You kind of really saw through it. And the thing I've been appreciating about Chrono Trigger so far, which I would have obviously experienced many times over if I'd played any of them in the 16-bit era, because there's so many of them, is just how cohesive the characters and the backgrounds and the art direction and everything really is when you're moving through the world. So it feels more cohesive to me or something because of just the 16-bit era, I guess, in a lot of ways. And the art direction, like, it's really well done. I think the animations are great too. But yeah, so you're moving around and fairly real time, which I kind of like. Anytime you change battle modes like you do in Final Fantasy or Pokemon or something, I don't know what it is. It's just not my thing, I guess. So it always jars me. So I really kind of appreciate, running into enemies in the wilderness and just fighting them right there. So that's part of how the game flows.
Yeah, it feels a little less. That feels like overtly structured. Now, I mean, I realize why they did that, right? It's to get the most out of both, basically both times, both systems. And they had that overlay mechanism on the PlayStation 1, at least, where they could just like literally run another program, there.
Right.
So they could just kind of slam that. I mean, it wasn't a ton of memory to stream in either. It was only a 2 meg system. So they really couldn't fit a ton. Whereas of course in this, you fit more by putting more on the cart for one thing. And on the same thing with the Game Boy, technically speaking, you had to, we talked a lot about the sort of bank switching and basically how they had to structure their memory to be like, okay, go get me this one that I'm going to fight, and that being just like one spot in memory being laid out in the same way as any other battle, and literally having to do that as well. Plus their weird rendering restrictions with their 4-bit or 2-bit rendering, I should say, 4 color rendering. Yeah, it's pretty wild. I do really like this. I mean, this, having played Earthbound just a year ago for the first time, I wasn't as familiar with that style. And I really like the top-down rendering. Of course, I was familiar with it from something like Zelda, but I was more familiar with the Final Fantasies of the world, and the sort of the strictures of going in and out of combat and having that be, that's a lot of time is lost in those games to things like waiting for the load to happen or what have you. And here it's just, you're straight into combat, which is really, really nice.
Which also means there's no random encounters, at least so far.
Right. Correct.
For those who haven't played or are wondering. So it's like each area where you may fight, I don't know, there's dangerous areas, and then there's sort of passive areas where you're not going to meet enemies and you'll see NPCs and stuff. But even if you clear everybody from that area and come back in, sometimes they'll repopulate and respawn everything back in. Those enemies will be in the same place. So you still can grind technically like you can in a random encounter, but you know what you're expecting, and you can even avoid them if you want to, by sort of like skirting around them. And they even, from a level design flow perspective, they even set some of that up sometimes where, clearly you can choose to go a certain way, or they even time it so you don't trigger the combat. And later on we'll have to talk about, I don't know, maybe now, but the sort of battle differences that the two of us are going after.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, one of the things that we have to do at the beginning of the game is choose what form of battle mode you're going to do, and it's the combat's called the active time battles, I believe.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And you chose the active mode, whereas I chose the wait mode. I chose wait mode because I'm streaming, and I might at any point look down and be responding to something in chat and get my behind handed to me. So I tend to find, when I play on stream, I tend to play somewhat easier ways to play, just because it being somewhat performative or whatever. Also, just not, my whole brain is not necessarily on top of the game. So there's that. Whereas you're playing the full on active combat, which is real time with I assume the timers are still visible and all of that part
Mm-hmm.
hasn't changed.
Yeah. I don't know if you have it or not, but there's a second gray bar below your health that is filling up. Yeah.
I also have that. It just waits for me to act.
It waits. Got it. So when it fills up to a yellow, then it waits for you to do something.
Correct. Yeah. So mine, I do still get to do the combos. I'm not sure exactly how that works, but I think basically what it's doing is if you don't act, so it's sort of like it just sits there and waits a while, and the others are still powering up. If you get to two characters that are required for the combo to have yellow bars, then you can trigger the combo. Correct, but I was thinking about like the enemies, and I think the enemies will still get to act if the game basically seems to guess that that's what you're doing, waiting for that. I don't know. It's like there's a little pause, but it's not really fully waiting. It's like I'll wait for a little bit more than it is like a straight up nothing else will happen until you act. So it's still somewhat active in that way because you need to have the ability to trigger those combos.
Got it.
So I think it's just a little gentler. Is really the only difference.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's, I'm really enjoying the active time battle. And yes, obviously I'm not streaming, so I have some flexibility there. I definitely was nervous because again, not my wheelhouse of a game sort of genre / style to play. And it felt like obviously something more turn-based is going to give me more flexibility more less anxiety, I guess, over each decision. But I didn't want to try to see, because I'd always had heard that the active time battle, that was one of the things in this game. And as Brett has told me, there's various games that use active kind of systems. So in fact, we did play Kingdom Hearts. So it's sort of like a weird hybrid. Man, Kingdom Hearts, what a weird game. And so, but I am enjoying it, and it adds, it kind of, even though you can't pause the game, there's times when it sort of reminds me almost like of Baldur's Gate, because Baldur's Gate was like that weird hybrid too, where it was sort of real time and things were happening based on some background statistics, but you could also pause and give orders and stuff. So
right. Yeah.
I kind of enjoy it, I think, more than the battle modes, like this sort of complete swap of the Final Fantasy battle modes. I think that always is just jarring for me. And I really like running through the forest and then both either seeing the enemies ahead of time. Sometimes they pop in from off screen and kind of surprise you, but sometimes there's even like a bush that's rustling.
Right.
And then you're like, oh, there's something in there. Sometimes it's a chicken, but, well, one time it was a chicken, but the rest of the time it's like an enemy. And so you can choose to engage or not, but then they kind of just pop out and they're in the space. And then your folks just kind of spread out. And then you're battling, the bars pop up, and I kind of, it feels more seamless and not exactly Zelda-like, but maybe
closer.
It's closer. Yeah. I think its closeness to Zelda maybe is why I'm enjoying it more than the sort of, the mode-based, the modal stuff, but it's seamless. I do enjoy that. But then of course there is the overworld sort of map as well, where you're traveling kind of more on a macro scale that a lot of JRPGs seem to have, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you had mentioned in pre-show having played Ni no Kuni and thinking on it now, I'm like, oh yeah, I know exactly what you mean. That's a game that is a fully 3D game and all that stuff. There's a lot of stuff that's different. You can move the camera around in that overworld and things like that, and you're still, seeing 3D characters run around, I believe. But you do basically at times go to places where a bit of text comes up and says if you hit the button, basically you'll go into the ding dong dell or what have you, which is the same here. So going between if you go out of your house and now you're in the overworld and you can see the village there with a number of buildings, residences, and the inn and things like that, the market, and then you will go to a forest, I guess, to get through to the castle, right, etc.
Right.
So
which was how
you're kind of going in and out of the overworld.
Right. Yeah. Which is the early Ultimas had that as well, right? Like, I mean, am I remembering that right? Like,
yeah, oh yeah, for sure. Ultima 2 definitely has that. Ultima 3 has that. When you go into the dungeons, it's different town and build certain buildings and towns, I guess. Ultima 4 is still that way. So yeah, that's another good callback. I mean, I think they probably influence each other. I don't. Well, obviously, this doesn't influence an early Ultima, but there is some sort of cross pollination of idea there, maybe.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see the sort of year by year timeline of that. There's got to be one out there or something. I'm curious because we hear in a modern day sense, we hear something like Breath of the Wild. You hear in interviews and stuff, you read in interviews where they said, oh yeah, the team, there's a new generation of Zelda designers coming up to Nintendo, and then that results, similar leadership from the previous ones, but a lot of the team are younger and they're playing games like Skyrim and Witcher, and in fact, even in their interviews, they were talking about how those games were big influences on Breath of the Wild, and so if you think about it, you go back 25 years and you're thinking, well, what games across the planet were these Japanese designers playing that might have influenced them? Not necessarily for Chrono Trigger, because it sounds like they probably had a formula going back to the sort of early Final Fantasy 16-bit games, but it just kind of doesn't dawn on me that that there might be some of that cross-pollination happening even back 25 years ago, 30 years.
Well, I mean, for sure. I mean, this is a game that I don't remember if he mentioned it when we interviewed him, but John Romero loves this game.
Oh,
this is like one of his absolute all-time favorites. Yeah, I mean, because this comes out in 95, it's after Doom, so we may not have gotten there. But this is absolutely a favorite of his. In fact, and I'll try to remember to put this in the show notes, but he gave a talk at GDC in 2013 about the lessons of Chrono Trigger.
Oh, neat.
Yeah.
I didn't see that. Yeah.
Yeah, but this definitely has a, Ultima 2 takes place basically in a ruined future type thing. Very strange.
3, so I didn't play 2.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
2's not my favorite. I would say, I think that game has some issues, but which I don't want to go into, but I definitely like a lot of the sort of ruined landscape that you see when we go to that time in this game.
Yeah,
harkens back to what I remember seeing in Ultima 2 when I played it, 5 years ago or whatever.
What year did Fallout come out? I forget. We played it and I forget. Better memory at that.
I do have a better memory at that. I want to say 96.
Or maybe Wasteland is what
Wasteland is a good. Yeah.
Not that we have proof of it, but you kind of just wonder, right? You're like, did anyone play the Waste? That was 88 that came out. So quite
Wasteland, yeah.
Yeah, Wasteland, quite a bit earlier, and so we're talking about
original Fallout was 97. I was wrong. It was in October 97.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just so funny, especially with this game, as we will get into with the time travel, obviously, as maybe the name some people could have guessed who haven't played it before. Just sort of where they're choosing to go and how they're representing that stuff, especially like you said, the future stuff. getting into sort of that post-apocalyptic. And, there were moments when I felt very Fallouty, you know what I mean? Talking to some NPCs and very depressing, and, the tonal shift, they're a seed, and you're talking to people who need food, so it's really fascinating, as we'll get into as we go kind of piece by piece. But anyway, so the influences on the structure, and as to continue what Brett was saying, I don't know if we have anything more to add on sort of how the game is played. Pretty traditional menu diving as far as like your equipment and your inventory and your tech and stuff like that. So that seems pretty standard at this point.
Yeah, pretty standard, pretty basic. I mean, I think that this is really, we talked about how the N64 comes out the year after this. This is really kind of the pinnacle of this era of design. This and those couple others we've mentioned, Final Fantasy VI, which was originally 3 here, and Earthbound, right? Earthbound being just a totally different sort of setting and everything, because it's a modern set game, but generally speaking, a very sort of similar feel, and really kind of at the pinnacle of all these systems. And of course, you can see the Sakaguchi style in at least 2 of those games. So
it feels like, and maybe it is Sakaguchi specifically, and that's what I'm kind of trying to voice and can't really find the words for. It feels like I don't want to, like, template is going to sound too sort of like reductive, but it feels like a formula, a really good formula that Square, and this is before they became Square Enix. And as those who may or may not know, Enix actually was the company that had Dragon Quest as a franchise. And they eventually, Square bought Enix, and they combined, they essentially merged like Activision Blizzard did. And now they kind of have both, but there was a time when those were competitors. But, there were definitely Dragon Quest, because I'd played Dragon Warrior, which also is to talk about Ultima. Like, there's a lot to talk about there between Dragon Warrior and Ultima, the old Ultimas. With
the first Final Fantasy 1 as well, for that matter.
Oh, really? Okay.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Final Fantasy 1's more like a Dungeons and Dragons game than you would guess from Final Fantasy 9.
Interesting. So then, so it's like fascinating to see like how, like, Chrono Trigger feels like you said, sort of like a distillation or a culmination of like a style, like it feels, I don't know if it's the version I'm playing. I'm not playing, obviously I'm playing on Steam. So, and it's a Jason Schreier sanctioned version, as I read up on, to make sure that I wasn't playing the worst version. They updated it so many times that it seems like it's really good. So I'm playing with the original graphics, quote unquote. I'm not playing with the high res. So I don't know how much more polished this version is because it's been updated so many times and ported, but it feels like an extremely polished version of one of those. Like, Square has their formula. They figured out how, they have sort of like, they probably have the code for the menus already ready, and they're just kind of using these sort of chunks. And then I think Brett said it in pre-show, like, it feels almost like the best of, I think that's a good way to put it, of like all the things they're really good at, put into one game, all the lessons they've learned, and it doesn't maybe have the sort of burden of being like the 6th one in a series or something. So that might be another advantage it has, where you can kind of come in fresh and feel like a beginning, middle, and end just for this game. I know there is a sequel, but there
are, in fact, I believe 3 sequels.
Are there? Okay.
Although I don't know that all 3 have made it to the US. So.
Oh, okay. So I just know Chrono Cross, but that's the sequel, right? Chrono Cross? It
is in the Chrono series, although it's not a direct sequel. So it was a little bit disappointing to fans because of that. There are people who really, really wanted more of what this game is like, and that game, this Chrono Cross is not like this game. It's more like, I don't want to get into it, but it's not. Anyway. It's not like this game.
Yeah. It just feels, Chrono Trigger just feels like a culmination of something. It feels very polished and very like, like lean, not lean in a bad way, but just like really they know what they're doing.
Yeah, like let's get on with it. Let's get into the fun, right? I mean, that's one of the things. I mean, there's a moment I really appreciated, and this was towards the end of our session. It's after you've done all this stuff with Robo, or as I call him, Bobo, and you get the password to that computer at the end of that lab or whatever.
Yeah, factory.
And, yeah, it's after the factory. It's in that final proto dome or whatever it is. So you're in that place, and you enter the code through the controller. What I love about that is that it's just like you all run into the next room, you open a portal and go. Like there's no, there's a lot of games in which that would be drawn out, and let's get a cutscene and set up the fact that we're going to do this, and then hit some buttons, and then this is just like, nope, time to go on to the next place. And Luca just kind of jumps up in the air and does her high five sort of motion, and everybody goes yeah, and they jump into the time portal and go. It's like, yeah, let's just get on with it. The combat feels that way too. Of like, I run into a thing, I maybe get a little intro thing to set the stage. There's a great in one of those dungeons towards the end, there's like a little trap where somebody's put out some food. It's like you go to the food and the enemies appear and things like that, but it gets right into it. There's not that sort of ponderous, load, play the music, pan around the characters that you're, in the modal stuff that you're not as crazy about. It's just straight from thing to thing to thing. There's a very quick clip kind of rhythm to it.
It's efficient.
Which I think, yeah, it's very efficient, and I also think it ties into a lot of what's going on. It's this is kids out on an adventure. You can almost imagine this. And referring again to Ni no Kuni. I mean, Ni no Kuni is a game which you can imagine actually all taking place in the kid's head. And this almost feels that way. Of just like we're having this adventure in our backyard, just the way the kids play. It has that kind of bouncy playfulness of just constant motion and the sort of where can we go next? We've gone back, let's go forward, let's go to the end of time, right? I mean, it just has this, this total bounce to the scenario. And since we're kind of talking about that, maybe we should actually take it to the beginning and talk a little bit about that trope. Because of course this game starts, with you as a kid, Chrono, if you left it as Chrono, waking up in bed and having your mom wake you up and say, "Hey, aren't you going to the fair today?"
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, the note I had made there, mentioning to Brett is, just not having played a lot of these, but definitely playing a lot of Zelda and, similar games to that. There definitely seems to be, like you said, tropes that they draw upon quite a bit. And so, there's similar, not exactly kids waking up in their room and going on adventures, but there's similar tropes in Western RPGs as well, as far as like the Chosen One, and BioWare was sort of like notorious for sort of retreading a lot of that stuff, in my opinion. And so, they're everywhere. But I thought it was funny to like the first scene is the mom coming over and waking you up and saying you better get to the fair. It's like, and that the fact there is a fair, there's always seems to be a fair. And it's a good, safe, kind of playful way, as you said, to kind of get things going, maybe. And maybe that's how they,
I mean, it's how Pokemon started.
Yeah, right.
It's how we were talking about Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time starts this way, I believe.
Yeah.
Very similarly, anyway, it's the fairy waking you up. And Earthbound starts this way. So this is a pretty common trope. It's meant to appeal to kids as well, right? It's meant to the audience for this is not 30-something-year-old men like us.
Yeah.
It's for it's for kids. It's for teens, young teens, tweens, whatever they're
they
playing.
Want to be able to relate, right? And
exactly.
Empathize. Yeah. So and then some and then I think one of the things to the beginning of the game, and also meeting, I assume you pronounce her name Marley, but I'm not positive on that.
That's what I assumed. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm not sure how. Yeah, I just didn't.
Meryl. I don't know what else you would say.
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, maybe that's how Marley spelled, and I just didn't know it. But anyway, you meet her pretty early at the fair once you go, and you kind of have this fun moment when you bump into her, or she bumps into you. It comes up later as far as like what actually happened there, which we'll get into later, which is brilliant. And then, but I kind of saw it coming a mile away as far as like her real identity and sort of another trope.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
The princess who is out, sort of Aladdin style out in the fair, kind of trying to enjoy life, but not tell people who she is. And it's revealed. And then, it gets deeper once you start traveling to different times, etc. But, it's just tropes, formula, whatever, like these common themes that are clearly going to be coming up. And then I think one of the good things that I'm enjoying so far about those tropes is they are taking some liberty with what spin they will sort of put on some of this stuff, especially with the time travel. But it's like they'll take a trope and then they'll kind of start mixing it up. It seems like they're going to do that maybe more and more over time. And that's a good tactic, right? Because you take something that the trope is a trope for a reason and people have expectations. And then I always love those moments when people, and I'm delighted by those moments when creatives will take a trope and surprise you with something different about it. And so I'm anticipating more of that coming. One thing to compare sort of the beginning of the game and sort of like about 5 hours in that we've played to something like Final Fantasy IX, that maybe it's unfair because it's 16-bit versus fully rendered. But one thing that I'm still sort of cautiously optimistic about is I feel like by this point in the first session in 9, I had more sort of like surprises or I don't know if surprises is right, but just sort of like things, and it could have been just because it was my first like full JRPG experience and it was just so foreign to me. But I feel like, that maybe it's limited by its 16-bit presentation, but I want more. I want to be sort of caught off guard more. There was one scene that we'll get to in a bit where I definitely was and loved it. But I don't want to see things coming if I can help it.
Right. Yeah.
I feel like Final Fantasy IX, sure. I just had no idea where this thing was going.
Sure. I mean, so one of the things I would say, because you mentioned BioWare earlier, is that one of the big contrasts I find between this and other games kind of this 16-bit era that we've been talking about, that kind of similar, Earthbound in particular comes to mind, is all of the goals for the game feel pretty short-term. Right. It's get up, get out of bed. Oh, go to the fair. Oh, and then go to, you end up going, it's like, oh, you got to make sure you see your friends, Luca's whatever, which is all kind of to direct you to the fun. But it's also very contrary to the Western RPG where it's like, I know I'm going to fight the big bad that I've literally probably already seen in a cutscene. Yeah. Right. Even Diablo has some of that, right? Like, oh, ultimately I'm going to be fighting the thing on the box, and that's not really the case in some of these. I don't think with a Final Fantasy game you ever really know where you're going to end up. Although you end up fighting, fate and destiny and other kinds of gods, and certainly nobody saw the end of Kingdom Hearts coming either, with that weird ship. But this one is very like it's all very short term. It's oh, I'm in this really dark, dismal future. Your first place you go, they're like, oh yeah, there might be a place to basically go in your time portal in this other place, and they tell you where you're going. Yeah. And that's not more than an hour or so away, probably. Yeah.
That's a good point.
Which is also a really big difference. You might, in a Western RPG, you might not see what the immediate goals are going to be. Where you're going to end up at the very end just from the start. Even I don't know, I was trying to think of another one, another BioWare, like Dragon Age, you sort of know where you're going, from the very beginning. Yeah. And this is just very, very different that way, where every goal feels like, oh, here I am in the past. And oh, Marley has taken place of their queen, Lean. I guess I got to go find her. It's just very short term, very situated in the place that you're in, almost episodic in that way.
Yeah.
Which is a real difference.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I wonder, with some of the structure of a lot of the other sort of Western games, even Baldur's Gate, there tended to be sort of a more focus on exploration, right? Like give you the potential ending state or goal, and then let you kind of go at it, especially in the newer, more open world games, right? Where it's like there might be some mysteries, but generally a lot of the game you're trying to figure out, where to go or choosing where to go, etc. And it's interesting to think about Zelda in that regard, for me at least, for Breath of the Wild, because that was flipping it kind of on its head, right? Because you knew what you needed to do from the beginning. And
right.
Literally 200 hours later, you're just roaming around the countryside when you could have gone to the castle, technically anytime. So it's interesting. Yeah, that's a good call out. That's a good difference. Although, maybe near the end of this session that we just had, maybe we have been presented with a potential.
Yeah, I think it's starting to grow out a little bit. Possible with getting to the end of time.
Yeah. Or I'm talking specifically about Lavos or Lavos.
Oh, Lavos. Yeah, that's right. The Day of Lavos. I wrote that one down too. Yeah, that's true. You also get that one. That big thing. Yeah. So you have, maybe been, I guess,
save the world by going into the future, kind of, or in the past.
Or in the past. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. I'm really excited to see where the time stuff goes. Like how one question I have, and maybe we can do some prediction here. Maybe because I don't know how much you've read up on the game or know about it.
I don't know anything about the plot. So
okay. Well,
I only know what you know.
Okay. Yeah. Structurally is more my question of sort of like, is there, so far the time travel has been essentially linear, right? You're going to the portals when they allow you to, but I'm interested to know, like, for instance, you find those chests that you can't open or those doors that you can't open. Right. I haven't figured out how to open them yet. So that gives me the impression that I can come back. Or at least I hope I can come back, and open them once I have the ability to open them. So that means I will be able to either choose to come back or they'll allow me to come back. Hopefully it's by choice. So then is there some structural difference later on where I'm actually jumping between times kind of on a whim or something? So I'm interested to see if that changes. Maybe I'm being too optimistic there, but
yeah, no, I actually don't know the answer to that. My suspicion is that I think you will absolutely be returning to those time periods, particularly because there are those, chests or whatever that have a mysterious aura or whatever it said about them. I think that definitely signals that you will be coming back. I don't know whether that'll be under your control. I really don't. Because even if you consult a walkthrough, they tend to go, well, you're going to go here and there, et cetera. So, it's hard to actually know. I mean, because I did look just to kind of pick where to play to. It's like, it looks like it's this many steps, so we'll go this far. So I don't really know. I suspect it is somewhat linear in that way, but like I said, I don't really know.
Right. Yeah, it's just things like chests and doors and things. If it is linear, then that means there'll be a point of no return moment, right? With that stuff, even if you do return a second time, where if you don't get them all, and you progress, then you can't go back again. So, but that's might be of the era, so that's okay if that's
yeah. Fine. So one game that playing this, I was sort of reflecting that Final Fantasy 13-2 has a lot in common with this game in terms of eras, different times that are different based on things that you've done in the past. You basically have this big timeline map that you're jumping around, and there's variations on each timeline and things that have impacts on other things, etc. And there's even, I think, a reference basically to the end of time. That location that we ended at here is, I think, reflected in that game as well, because I'm thinking of an area of that game that has sort of those gates around it, and kind of the I don't know, marble floors or whatever. And I did not know that playing Final Fantasy 13-2, which I played sometime in the last year, that's what I was looking at. So there you go. It's just funny to me, like how they cross pollinate and how they inform each other, and that's probably some homage there, So anyway, I will have to. I might have to read up on that now that I've thought about it.
Right. Well, oops. They're definitely no stranger to. Kingdom Hearts, right, has Final Fantasy characters in it as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
they definitely are creating their own sort of universe there, which is cool, and I'm sure that the fans eat that stuff up. I had no idea that Chrono Trigger had some of that going on too.
Let's move on to hit some like highlights. I don't think we have time to go through all the story stuff. We sort of, went through you go. You go, and Luca actually accidentally sends both Marley anyway into the past. Yeah. And you chase behind to save her, and you spend some time back in the past, which is great, because everybody's been talking about this war, that you're celebrating at the Millennial Fair, the victory that you had, 400 years ago. They're literally telling you, oh yeah, 400 years ago this happened. And then you go back. It's very clever. Yeah. It sort of sets the stage for where you go. And then you go back there, and I guess there's a couple things that are pretty great there. What stands out for you?
We definitely have to talk about the court happened there, right? Yeah. Okay.
That's when you come back, the court.
When you come back. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. In 1000 AD.
Yes.
Okay.
In you go from 1000 at the fair, you accidentally get sent back with the pendant and all that stuff to 600. And then when you come back to 1000, you get the trial.
The two things I loved about the 600 AD. So it's in general, it's going to be cool to see essentially this land. I'm blanking on the name, Gradia.
Sure.
Gradia.
I have no idea.
I think that's the name of the land. And so it's cool to immediately see, when you go to the overworld map, you see where the town is, you see, where the castle is. There's this cathedral in that section, which was cool, and we'll get to in a second. And so I just love time travel games where you get to see locations, right, from different points of view and what has changed. And so, for instance, the square where you're celebrating in
Guardia
1000 AD is not there. It's a replaced by sort of a canyon area. And then when you get there, you realize that they think that Marley is the queen who has been missing. And as Brett said, they're talking about the war going on with the Fiend Lord, I think, and all this kind of stuff. So that's sort of unraveling. But then they have this funny, cool sequence where, and I guess this might be I don't remember exactly where this takes place, whether it's the transition getting back to 1000 or not AD, but they have this sort of moment where they're sort of describing to you how Marley is connected to the queen.
Oh, yes, the genetics. Yeah.
And it's sort of like, it's a very kind of clever and sort of a surprising like little scene where they're showing you like the lineage, right? And how it's connected. And then you of course realize at that point that for Marley to exist in any good time travel story, the queen has to survive. And so you go and find her. They have the introduction. One of my most memorable, obviously, characters so far is the frogman dude. Some predictions about who that is later, maybe. I won't say now. And so I don't know if the structure of the game is that you're just going to be being able to play with these extra characters in their own timeline or not. I hope you'll be able to like kind of choose who to play with throughout the game at some point. We'll see. Maybe it'll be just more linear. But I love the frog section. And then, another sort of trope is this sort of the Chancellor ends up of 600 AD, becoming, an enemy. And you go to the cathedral and
I literally said when I encountered the Chancellor for the first time. I said, I should just kill this Chancellor. Nothing good ever happens with a Chancellor.
Yeah. And he's up there in the tower pouting or whatever he's doing. They're like, yeah, this guy's up to no good. But there was a funny scene when you get to the cathedral where you're fighting the monsters trying to get to him. He ends up being this creature called Yakra. All the bosses I think have been pretty fun and creative. Simple, but pretty. We'll talk about the one in the future in a bit. But you're fighting these enemies who essentially are turning themselves into humans, and that's how they're sort of infiltrating the castle. But you find this one room where they're talking. Do you remember that room where they're talking?
Yeah, they're all sitting around the table having dinner. Yeah, and they're on their like break or whatever, and they're just chatting. It has kind of an adventure game feel there because you actually you have to go in there to get the guy to walk out. To go and I don't know, unlock something or something like that. I don't remember exactly what happens. But you basically have to follow him at that point. Yeah.
Oh, do you really? I didn't know if you did have to follow him or not.
I did follow him. I mean, I think that I think it's, whether you have to follow him, you have to end up where he ends up, I guess, really. Yeah.
Maybe he's a hint, right, of where to go or something. But essentially, you eventually get to that statue area. But yeah. But it was just kind of, that's a great example of the tone of the game in many ways, right? Where that room, you get in there and you get to talk to the enemies because they think that you're
just in disguise. Yeah.
In disguise, yeah. So it was a fun moment I remember. And then of course, and then the fighting the Yakra.
Yeah, that in and of itself has sort of, that East Asian sort of flair. You see this a lot in cinema of both horror and comedy, right? Yeah. Just like you look at something like Park Chan-wook or Bong Joon-ho or whatever, they put their comedy right up, literally slapstick right up against something really terrifying and horrible, like murder, and then a comedy bit, and those are just things that happens in their sort of art in a different way than we tend to approach things.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great example. It's also, keeping with the lighthearted tone of just, it's okay. It's safe, right? In a way it's safe fun.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't it be crazy if the monsters thought we were also monsters, is a great like fantasy for a kid as well. So,
mm-hmm. Yeah. And even just getting into the cathedral in the intro and you see the sort of the women nuns, whatever they were, kind of praying, right? And then they're sort of starting to talk to you, and then they sort of slip up, right? They say something like, "Oh, you look so delicious."
Delightful.
So delightful,
Yeah.
And it's just really fun, playful little moments like that. But then, eventually you get back to. Do you have any sections in 600 that you wanted to mention?
No, I don't think so. I wanted to make sure we mentioned the frog, who for me.
Oh yeah.
First of all, he's named Longo in my game, but also I gather in my translation, he speaks more of in a Shakespearean lilt than he does in yours, which is also kind of fun. Just the way he speaks, he rhymes. He has like a little rhyming couplets that he speaks in, which must have been really difficult to capture. So
yeah.
Translation is really, really difficult for the era. I'm going to make a note to talk about that later because of how things were laid out and memory. And you see it in the names, that when you can name things, that you only get like 5 characters, which is good for me and for you, I guess, if you use your shortened version of your name. But, for a lot of people, 5 characters is not enough for a name in English. That is a common restriction of the time because, of course, Japanese is, I guess you'd say particle based, where you have a gram. I can't come up with the word, but you have a
character, you mean, or
the characters are a little pictogram is what I was looking for.
Oh yeah,
that represents a lot more, and it's like a syllable rather than than a character. So
yeah, right. Yep.
character. So or
more
Greek
depth
character.
than breadth
Yep.
with their
With you can say an awful lot in 5 characters in Japanese than you can in a similar 5 characters in English.
Right.
So I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Quick prediction on the Frogman, which is maybe obvious, but they kept talking about Cyrus, this legendary knight who went looking for the queen and disappeared. I'm assuming he's maybe Cyrus.
I would guess, yeah.
Yeah. Good. All right.
Yeah.
I'm on track with my tropes.
I think so.
Yeah, and I love seeing the differences. The bridge is blown, and so you can't get down to the southern section. And they talk about that, and I just, like you mentioned, I love that in 1000 they talk about the war, and then you go there, and then you see the lineage for Marley and stuff. So it's building a good sort of, to sound cheesy, tapestry for the time stuff, and but yeah, so then you get back to 1000, and Marley was, of course, missing this whole time. And so while she was missing, and you're the one that comes back with her, and you enter the castle together, and of course, the person that comes with her, they're going to accuse of being the one that was responsible for her missing. So why don't you walk us through probably my favorite part of the game? So.
Yeah. So that was absolutely fantastic and a joy to behold. And particularly I had to have my stream like laughing at me. The Chancellor basically accuses you of kidnapping. And Marley, or I think, is her real name like Nadia or something like that? But anyway, she comes to your Nadia Guardia. She comes to your defense. Guardia is the country.
Guardia, not Gradia. Okay.
Yeah. It might be the Allrux of our current session.
Oh, no. Gradia.
He comes and accuses you, and they basically say, well, then we'll have a trial, and so it sets up this whole different scene where you've got character, a jury, or I don't know, onlookers or whatever, all around the corners of the screen, and sort of the throne, and then either side, your defending attorney, and then the Chancellor prosecuting you for this crime, and you're in the dock basically. And the great thing is then it just refers to events that happened at the Millennial Fair that you literally as the player did, which is just amazing. So he'll accuse you that, you didn't help this little girl find her cat, or he'll accuse you that you stole this old man's lunch. And you have the opportunity to say, no, I didn't do that. And then, which I did. Like, I had forgotten that I'd taken this guy's lunch. I guess I didn't even really register that that's what I had done.
Oh, I didn't do that. I didn't do it. There was no.
Oh, yeah. So so where the cat is, where you first find and the cat runs away, there's also that old man who's like, I'm going to sit down and have my lunch. He's kind of walking back and forth. It's to the west of this sort of second fair area. Yeah.
But I didn't take his lunch.
Right. Well, so his lunch is down at the end of the table, and I didn't know what it was. It's not obvious to me that it was supposed to be his lunch. But I went and I was like, oh, I wonder what this is. And I interacted with it, and it's like you eat a chicken or something like that. I don't know what it was. And so I get accused by the Chancellor of stealing this old man's lunch, and I'm like, no, I never did that. And it plays a cutscene of me like going to the end of the table and eating the lunch, and all the chat on my stream is going, oh man, you're busted.
Yeah.
You totally did that. There was something else too. It was like, going after the pendant, like going after the pendant instead of asking the princess, what happened, etc. I mean, it takes all these little events that were just you wandering around the fair and throws them right back at you. And you're like, oh, the game's paying attention to me. Like, that's the amazing moment of it, is just the game noticed what I did, which is one of those things, we talked about that a lot with adventure games when we played Day of the Tentacle, and also with Tim, in the interview, and with Dave, Tim, and Dave Grossman, about the game noticing that you did a thing that was maybe clever, that isn't the solution that they're looking for, but they want to say, yeah, we thought of that too, that, and knowing that you're there, it's like a little conversation with the designer, when you're doing stuff like that. And it's, those are magical moments in games, and maybe the number one lesson we should take from things like that.
Yeah. Well, and I think we talked about this in Final Fantasy. Like, I made a note with 9. It reminds me of the play or the opera,
Right.
Where it's this sort of very specialized, very, quote unquote expensive thing to make and develop, and very unique, but its impact is really big. And in this case, as opposed to the opera was definitely cool, but I feel like in this case, this was to Brett's point, an even better sort of presentation or sort of a reveal to the player that this is going to be a game where where your choices will have impact.
Yeah.
And you may not always know it, but, and to some degree, depending on how fair the game is, for a player like myself, I get a little paranoia about it because it's not always going to tell you, what the in fact, it never seems to tell you what the repercussions of your answers are. But the fact that it lets you do it is great. And I think of the era, probably something that really blew people's minds. But then you
got to remember, Tim, that the rest of the game is telling you it's okay. Everything's going to be okay.
Yeah, no, that's
this
fair.
Is not. I mean, one of the things you have to remember is like this is not a Sierra adventure game or something like that. Like you can't fail, right? In that sense. I mean, you can fail, you can lose in combat or whatever, but like it is set up to make your choices will matter. And I think that's, going to be one of the big themes of the game is like the choices we make in the present impact our future, right? I mean, I think that's quite obviously where this game is going. But at the same time, they're there, this is a safe space.
Yeah.
I guess I would say.
No, and that's a good point. And they are definitely bending over backwards to make sure you understand that it's safe. I think when I said players like myself, what I meant more, I think, was that
bald people.
Bald old people. No, that when I play RPGs, especially, I like to play the RPGs in specific ways that I like to play in. You know what I mean? And so when you're given choices, especially binary choices, then I want to make sure I'm making the decision that I would want to make. You know what I mean? And some games, BioWare did a fairly good job at this in most of their stuff. I haven't played the Dragon Age stuff, but I've played pretty much everything else. Of letting kind of giving you an understanding of what your choices are going to generally do, not exactly, but often they give you a sense of it. And and in here it's like I know it's going to be fine no matter what I pick. But if I'm sort of quote unquote role playing a sort of chrono that I want to play, I kind of want to know that I'm going in the direction I want to go in. It's more of like a choice. It's more of like a style thing than a failure thing.
Sure, I get it. I mean, you sort of like to know with, I don't know. Have you played a Mass Effect game, right?
Yeah, I played one.
You want to know. It's like Renegade. You want to know. I'm making, and they're very explicit there. And this game is really, there isn't any sort of system like that. You are playing the one character. I don't know. I like to think of it as more like, hey, whatever choices I make, that's just the timeline that Chrono's on. All of these are possible timelines for Chrono.
But I want to play, but I also want to sort of play I tend to want to play the sort of valiant paladin kind of, archetype, right? So
sure.
And that generally,
as do I.
That generally is clear with the sort of questions they're asking you and stuff. And I think of the time, it's still an amazing feat, and I can't knock them for being trailblazers in something that in RPGs it hasn't been done that much by this point. And maybe they're influenced by some specific thing that we're not thinking of. But something like The Witcher 3 I'll use as a really modern example. They don't have the BioWare or Mass Effect sort of binary clarity to what your decisions are, but the writing is such that you generally know what you're doing, what you're deciding. You know what I mean? Based on the attitude of the character. So there's different ways to do it without having to be sort of heavy-handed like Mass Effect. But anyway, sure. The other point I was going to make is the courtroom is the perfect sort of presentation of this sort of new concept to an RPG player. You know what I mean? Because they have your undivided attention. They magically show you the flashback of the scene that happened. They even have witnesses come in, like the little girl with the cat comes in.
Right. Yep.
She says, "That's not what happened. He just ignored me or something, And you're like, I'm sorry, little girl. I didn't find your cat. I couldn't figure the puzzle out to figure out how to get your cat. So it just was and then also beautifully rendered. And then a small note, back in the cathedral in 600 AD, when you get to the end where you fight Yakra, there is a statue behind him that is the same. I guess it's probably because it's the cathedral and maybe that's why it's there, but there's sort of like a little bit of like a homage or sort of like calling out that statue is meaningful. And then that's the same statue in that courtroom in the stained glass behind. So there's like a theme going on there that are like, something's deeper. Maybe I'm making more out of it than I should, but
I mean, it might be the god, the worship, that the figure of worship or something like that. Yeah. But
the funny thing is, in the cathedral, the monsters were worshiping that god. You know what I mean? So it's
right.
Like,
they're all singing in that room. Yeah.
Who is that god? Does everyone understand what's happening here? But maybe I'm wrong. But there's a lot.
No, we'll see. We'll see where that goes. Yeah. Now that you mentioned that, I'm curious myself. So.
Yeah. This is a great scene, though. That's going to be one of the most memorable scenes, for sure. For me.
Oh yeah, a high point for sure. So then we bust out of prison. It's a little weird at that point because you are, I guess, killing all these guards as you fight your way out, which is a little bit off tonally. Some of them I knocked on the head, and some of them I had battles with. I don't know if that was the same for you, but then as you exit to get to the final bridge, there's a great scene that I absolutely love. I called it out to you in pre-show, which is the guy who's basically the superintendent of prisons or whatever, the chief warden. I forget what his name is, but
I think they just called him the warden.
Yeah, something. He's sitting there and he sees you come in and he races off like he's going to go get, more guards or something. I don't know if he slips and falls and knocks himself out. There was a piece of paper on his desk that you see when you come in. But when he falls back into the room unconscious, it hits the desk and makes that paper kind of slide off and fall to the floor, highlighting how important it is that you read this, which is just a great, nonverbal, nobody has to say anything. It's a simple animation and it just points out make sure you read this. And I love things like that. I mean, those are little, the designer talking to you, but not overtly moments. That's a very, I know I've mentioned this before on the cast of those little things where, it's a little sleight of hand really to point out that importance of that thing. I mean, you'd probably look at it anyway, but this is we took the time to move this, so you would notice it. And it's instructions for how to beat the boss you're about to fight. It tells you, the dragon tank prototype or whatever it's perfect. It's invincible. Unless you take out its head first. Yeah. Which is it's great because of course then you're going to go fight that thing and the tank heals the body. I better take out the tank first. The head heals the body.
But also you don't have to pick it up. You don't have to read it, right? So it's
no, you don't.
And then if there's just a lot of little optional things like that throughout the game that are you can do out of order, and it just shows some choice space that feels like isn't common, especially at this time and with these games. I bet. Did you, for instance, pickpocket or did you search the warden after he fell down?
I did not.
So you get 5 potions off of him.
Oh, do you really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, no, I didn't
pickpocket him. So I'm interested you said you knocked some guards on the head.
Yeah.
I don't think I did that. How does that work?
Okay, so I walked up behind some of them and was able to just when I got near to him, the Chrono would just bop him on the head instead of, and they would fall unconscious. So there's another maybe choice.
So that's a little bit of a stealth mechanic there then. So
yeah, I don't.
Yeah,
I don't know if they were patrolling or anything. It just kind of happened. I wasn't. So it's not overtly me trying to do anything. You can get by enemies and stuff like that. So I wonder if it was just if you come up to this enemy in this way, you get to get this kind of reward. Yeah,
Cool.
I don't know. Yeah, it was neat.
Maybe explore with that a little bit, because it seems like there is some sort of sight line for triggering enemies into battle, especially for me with my active, so you can avoid them, but then I'm wondering if there is a sort of like, some sort of sight line that if you come behind them, if something different happens. Maybe it was just with the guards. That's fascinating to me. I don't think that ever happened to me, but anyway, then that leads to the dragon tank bridge battle, which I thought was great and fun, and it was neat to sort of target different locations to disable.
It's also a side-on view, which is nice, instead of the top-down view, which is kind of cool. So you get to see this, rather than seeing this tank, which I don't think would read well from the top. You get to see it in profile. So it's a really good, choice of how they use the space. And I think even when you're moving across the bridges, they're using some of the SNES capabilities to make the we talked about this maybe with Super Metroid, but they can do the affine transformations in the back, which basically means they could do things like parallax and stuff like that. And I think some of those things start to show through here. We'll see Mode 7 stuff in a little while, but this, you start to see some things like that, some stuff you could do with the hardware that you couldn't do with prior consoles. So super cool. And from there, I guess we basically gather up Nadia / Marley, whatever her name is supposed to be, and go instead to the future with Luca.
Right. Yeah, Luca shows up to help, and we're trying to escape the guards, and then they kind of funnel you straight into another portal, and then you run into the forest and into a portal in a clearing. I think it ends up being 2300, right? AD, is that right? Or 20?
I think that's right. Yeah.
20.
I did not write that one down, actually.
I think it's 23, but I mean, it's just so funny. Like, it's Fallout, right? It's
pretty grim.
Wasteland, apocalyptic. See these cool domes, sort of like the civilization that's been destroyed. And so obviously there's some mystery there. Also, like whenever you go to a new timeline, they don't tell you what time you're at originally,
right?
Immediately, so you either have to talk to somebody.
Yeah, there's a little question mark in the corner, even.
Which is a nice touch. Gives some mystery in there. And so similar structure with the overworld, but then just like obviously the art style changes. And one touch that I wrote down for the post-apocalyptic stuff is they do a nice, when you're indoors, they do a nice subtle filter of like darkness and smoke, sort of like over the whole screen, that makes it feel very grimy and kind of like depressing, and it's pretty subtle. At least on my screen, it was pretty subtle, but I think it really helps. It makes it feel darker and stuff. And then when you're fighting robots and stuff, and they like shoot lasers and it lights up the screen, so you have this nice contrast. Spells do the same thing, but
more good SNES stuff. I think they're probably in the lighting, probably just palette stuff, but that overlay stuff feels like a thing that was also, I feel like we saw some of that in Castlevania 4.
Yeah, for sure. There's fog.
That was a thing that they were doing there as well. So again, sort of the capabilities, and this is like we said, it's kind of at the end of the life of this console, and they can pull out all the stops because they know how to get the most out of the machines. We've talked about that with the transition of hardware and other times as well. In particular, with like God of War, the original, and Shadow of the Colossus as being games that really use those systems really out to their limits in very different ways. But I think you probably have more limitations as far as what directions you can take the older hardware with than something like the PS2. But fascinating to see those things happening as well. And no performance degradation, which can't really be said of Castlevania 4, which had some trouble with those those sections, performance wise. But that's a good call. Like I didn't make a note of that, but you're totally right that it feels oppressive, and I think it's meant to indicate, this is not the way it's meant to be, right? So that you're going to have the opportunity to change the future, maybe.
Yeah, it's very good. In fact, there's a moment when you're interacting with the computer, the mainframe computer underneath that one dome town, and they show a flashback, which of before the apocalypse, which essentially seems to present you with this crazy creature or devil or demon or something coming from out of the ground called Lavos that seems to be the one that created the apocalypse. And so that kind of ends up being sort of maybe a new macro goal for you to save the world, essentially.
Yeah. And in fact, it does give you a goal, I believe, of researching Lavos in your original time. So it explicitly like calls out, we've got to get back and research this Lavos thing before, whatever, this bad event happens. Yeah.
But you are then eventually you find a new character for your party called Robo, or that's the default name, but you call them Bobo, which
I did.
Okay. It's pretty funny. I'll give you that. That's a good one. Great little character, though. And, probably one of the most terrifying scenes of any robot scene I've ever seen happens when you get to that factory and you get to the end, essentially to sort of like a sort of boss.
Oh, you skipped over the jet bike race.
Oh, sorry, I did. No, go ahead.
We gotta do that because that happens before the factory and everything. Yeah. There is so basically that first dome you're in, you get those folks you had mentioned earlier that you get them some seeds, so they're like won't have to just use the Enertron to heal their bodies but not fill their stomachs. Maybe they can grow something. It's very very Wall-E right there.
Yeah.
And you and they tell you, the thing that you're looking for might be to the east at this other dome, proto dome, and they say, well, you'll have to go through Lab 32, and going through Lab 32 involves encountering. I don't think I wrote down his name, but he's how I introduced you today.
Yeah,
this very cool character. He's I don't know. It's a very 90s sort of choice. Flamboyant character who he's got a little gang, I guess, of admirers maybe. And he challenges you to a race a jet bike or jet sled or something like that through to the end of Lab 32.
It's just
Johnny. It's just Johnny. Yeah. He also reminded me of that character in Shenmue, the Elvis one.
Yeah.
Very, very sort of similar, sort of verve and kind of feel to him.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to race Johnny through, and you get a Mode 7 moment there of rotating the camera around. Looks a little bit like a Mario Kart sort of thing moment. You remember we played some of that on the SNES Classic as well. So you get that sort of feel. Did you beat him on the first try?
I did, yeah.
Yeah.
The victory lap after you beat him, though, is hilarious because they just like... They're just spinning around, showing off the Mode 7 stuff. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. They're just kind of spinning the camera. Yeah, it's very funny.
Exactly.
It's very good.
Gregarious. Look at what we can do. By the way, Johnny is half bike, half man, which I did not pick up on. He is not riding a bike.
It doesn't. He is the bike.
He is the bike. Which I thought something was weird with his artwork. I was like,
me too. Yeah, it doesn't quite read as him being half bike, but that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, totally like that Shenmue guy. That's hilarious.
He's a bike centaur.
Yep, a bike tar.
Bike tar. Okay.
So then you get to Proto eventually.
Right. Proto and Robo. So tell me about this horrifying event, the robot event.
Well, so you get to this. Luca fixes the robot, and he's pretty cool. Got a good little attitude about things. He's going to help you out. You go up to this factory, turn off some alarms, and I'm not even completely sure what we did there. Not crazy about that section, that level design. I didn't think was very good, But anyway, you get to the end, and there's not really a big boss battle, but it ends up being this battle with like 6 or 8 robots that are all similar robots to the same robot as Robo, or Bobo, as Brett would say. And, he's been helping them out, and Luca has fixed him to not attack humans, but that was his original purpose when they built the robots. And so the group of robots thinks he's basically defective and a traitor, and they basically shame him for helping the humans. And then there's this scene where all the robots start beating him up, and it's just a horrifying moment where I'm like,
and they won't let you interfere either.
No.
Yeah.
And then they throw him down a chute. Like, it's terrifying. And I felt terrible for Robo. And as a kid playing that scene, like, I just don't know. Like, it was, obviously the 16-bit rendering is one thing, but like,
but your imagination is fertile. You can definitely imagine how horrible that is.
No, and if you imagine, like, I had multiple times when I thought to myself while playing this first session, well, what would this game be like if they did like a Final Fantasy remake version of it, where they just did everything in super high res, and like that scene would be terrifying.
Yeah.
Because they basically just like, it's a group fight of, just beat up on this poor guy, and he thinks he's doing the right thing, so it's interesting. I wanted to call it out because it's very memorable, very terrifying. And then there's, maybe there's some interesting little commentary about that, right, too, going on there. Probably giving him too much credit, but it's a moment that makes you think. Ultimately, Robo does decide to go with you, though, and he doesn't end up dying from that. And you of course defeat the ones that were fighting you. But yeah, quite a moment.
Yeah, I really liked that moment. It was 6 robots, ganging up on him, and him saying, no, stay back, my friends. I have to face this, and this is my fight, not yours, and that sort of thing. And of course, you end up fighting them all anyway. So it's maybe not entirely on there.
Yeah,
but they're all like versions of him. Like, he's R66-Y, and they're like R64-Y and R67-Y and things like that. So they're all are clearly basically the same as him, although he's sort of a golden color, and they're all sort of metallic looking.
It's not an airtight
non-gold,
for sure, but
yeah.
But I did sort of like appreciate to what degree they used it, you know what I mean? Because they wouldn't do a scene like that with a human, but they had this robot, so they're going to fool with what sort of like tropes they can do there. And, the concept of a very loyal, valiant robot sacrificing itself for humans is also a trope, right? Anyone who's watched Mandalorian and stuff, spoiler, but so, there's
or Planetfall, as we were talking about in our...
Right. Yeah, and I'm sure it's all over Asimov or something. There's stories I haven't read that it's even more popular. But anyway, it was an interesting scene, and
I mean, Data in Nemesis, that classic.
Hey, Nemesis is I like Nemesis a lot. That's one of my favorites.
I am so sorry for you.
It's pretty good.
It's terrible.
No. You should.
I was in the theater looking at the person I was seeing that with and laughing at how bad that was. Literally in the theater.
There's some good stuff in Nemesis, and it. Now we're totally off topic, but there's some stuff that happens there that directly relates to the new show. So, Picard. Which,
I'm sure. Also, who cares?
I care. Picard's pretty good.
Anyway, I'm even a Star Trek fan more than you are, and I was like, oh my god, that movie. So,
but you should watch Picard. Anyway, but a scene like that makes you way more empathetic for a character that is a robot. Anyway, right?
So, absolutely, yeah.
So it's a good call because they want probably each of their party members to have their own unique spin on why you would want. Party. So.
You're getting that from from the Frog too, right? I mean that they're taking these characters that are not human and they're humanizing them. And I think that there may end up being a sort of that may be one of the other themes that we may see emerge. Seeing these sort of secondary characters, that a human's a human no matter how small. It's sort of a message. Yeah. Sort of a hey, we're all human. every sentient being has a right. So there might be some other themes that are going to develop out of that are already showing through a little bit.
Yeah.
Which is all, that's all just great stuff. This is all, they're not huge, complicated themes, but they're great for this sort of game and for the audience for whom it was built, right? The choices you make today are going to matter tomorrow. And hey, just because somebody doesn't look like you doesn't mean they don't matter. Those are great themes and lessons to be focusing on and putting them up front and center right at the beginning. So.
Yep. A couple quick, before we close, localization things that I love that I want to mention. One, they're called gunbows, apparently, instead of crossbows.
I don't think they are for me.
Yeah, so it's hilarious. I think it's gunbow. It might be bowgun, but I think it's gunbow. So it's like, yeah, okay, there's a gunbow. Love it. And then my favorite enemy name is Floral Horror. It's
wow.
Floral Horror, which is like one of the plant things in
that might also be different for me then. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. But say that
maybe fast. I don't remember. Yeah.
But
it's a pretty good one.
It's just hilarious. Like the alliteration there is just hilarious. I love it.
Yeah, that's good.
Favorite JRPG enemy name so far. Yeah. So now and then we made it to the end of time, and I don't know what's happening there, but I stopped. So
yep. I stopped. I saved as soon as I could. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Cool.
Yeah. Well,
why don't we take a quick break? We went very long. We'll take a quick break and come back.
Okay.
Welcome back from the break. We are, of course, discussing Chrono Trigger, and it's, as we've said before, the last game we're going to do before we take a little hiatus for reasons which Tim will repeat here with a plea of his own. Sir.
Yes, I kind of alluded to it in previous episodes, but I finally have a sort of landing page set up for it. I'm doing the Pacific Crest Trail, as hopefully most people know. So we're going to be taking that hiatus this summer. It takes about 4.5, 5 months to do. But I thought while I'm on it, that I would sort of run a simple, maybe small charity sort of pledge drive for every mile that I hike. It's a 2,650 mile trip. And so I'm not expecting people to pledge, if anyone does want to, $1 or something, because that's a lot of money, but do a cent, or you can even do one-time donations for even just, a couple bucks or whatever. So yeah, I'm going to be doing that. The webpage is allthosewhowander.org. Yes, a little Tolkien reference there. And so really most of the information that you'd want is up there. There's a simple button there for getting you to the pledge page, which then gets you to pledgeit.org, which is the site that I'm using to do the pledge drive with. And I added a little bit of a spin on there, something I've wanted to do for a long time, something like this. For anyone who does pledge, I'm actually going to be doing some sort of small, probably very small, sort of documentary, I guess I'm kind of calling it, small documentary video game based on my journey. I have no idea really what the design of the game's going to be, or what how it's going to turn out, or what it really is. So anyone who's interested in the game is definitely taking a risk, but pledging for charity seems like not a risk anyway. And so anyone who does pledge will get the special edition of that game. Once the game is done, whatever it is, I do want it to be free for everybody. The regular version, but I thought it would be fun to do some sort of special edition for anyone who pledges. And the top, I think I added in this recently, the top 3 or maybe 5 pledgers will actually get a cameo in the game itself. of your choice, name choice or what have you. So again, I don't know exactly what it is. I put some info on the page. I have a page, sub-page devoted to the game itself with some goals and some of my thinking behind why I'm doing it and stuff. As far as I know, there's, for those who know the Pacific Crest Trail, there's a lot of great other materials and mediums out there straight on sort of people's journeys, like books and films and documentaries. And of course, probably a lot of people know Wild by Cheryl Strayed, the book and now movie. So that's what most people know the trail by. But there really hasn't been any interactive stuff that I've found that's been based on that. So I want to do something to devote to my journey and get people back out into the wilderness and kind of documentary style, so we'll see what it turns out to be. It won't come out very quickly after I'm done, I'm sure, because it will take me probably quite a while to do it. But even if you don't care about the game, I'd appreciate anyone who's interested to go up there and pledge for my miles.
And did you say who you were pledging to?
Oh, sorry. No, yep. Good call. Yep. I had meant to do charity? That. Yeah. So the two charities, I'm splitting it 50-50. I'm pledging half of the money to the PCTA, Pacific Crest Trail Association, which essentially is the nonprofit group that governs and sort of takes care of the trail. They're also responsible for essentially protecting pieces of the trail. There's actually parts of the trail that are still privately owned. And so over the years, essentially since the 90s, they've been trying to buy up or give the land to the public lands or organizations like the parks or Forest Service, what have you. And then the other charity, the other 50% is going to go to Big City Mountaineers, which is a national organization that is that focuses on getting under-resourced kids into the wilderness so they can enjoy it, because it's not something that is easy to do for everybody. So that's those are the two charities that I'm pledging the money to. So anything helps. Appreciate it. I've already had one very generous donor. So I'm well on my way. I wanted to try the goal wise. I don't know if I'll make it, but the goal is to essentially raise $1 a mile. So
I suspect you'll make it.
I might make it, especially because of some already generous donor. But if I make more than that, that would be great. But we'll see what happens. So plug is over.
I have some information that you may have made it. So.
Oh, okay. Okay, great. I haven't looked today.
I was busy while you were talking about it. I was like, oh yeah, I meant to do that. So I think you might be good.
Oh, good. All right. Well, thank you. A couple very generous donors then. So if you see that on Pledge It, I've already made my goal. Don't let that dissuade you. Please still pledge. And if I do,
just means your goal is too low, sir.
Yeah, I guess so. I've never really done something like this, so I didn't really know what. I didn't know how to judge what a appropriate goal was. You can, of course, you can earn way more than your goal. So keep pledging. Let's double it. I don't know. I'll keep mentioning it to people throughout the remaining episodes, of course. So, but yeah, that's it. All so right, go to allthosewhowander.org. There's plenty of information if you care up there.
Cool. All right. Well, I hope it does well as your QA person.
Yes, Brett was very helpful in launching that site.
Okay. Well, before we turn to what we're playing up to next, let's do some feedback. I think we got 3 emails we're going to read this time. You have 2 of them. I have 1. Go ahead with that first one.
Okay, the subject is a probably too lengthy note on Chrono Trigger port/version differences from James Roberts. First of all, congratulations on 200 episodes. Thank you, James. I was excited to hear on the latest episode you will be tackling Chrono Trigger. It's my all-time favorite game. I play through it about once a year and never get tired of revisiting this classic. Over the years, I've purchased this game in just about every version it has been released in. Original SNES, PlayStation 1, which is his favorite version, he says, a Nintendo DS, PlayStation 3, as a PS1 classic, iOS. Just about the only version I don't have is the recent PC version. While many people are probably emailing you to tell you which version is the best version, and what content is different between them, I wanted to bring to your attention just how different the naming is between the versions. Most of the ports and releases of this game after the original SNES version have a huge amount of items, texts, locations, monsters, and bosses renamed. Interesting. It seriously is hundreds of things they changed the names of. Some things were changed to be less confusing. For example, Chrono has a technique named Confusion in the SNES version. This technique attacks an enemy 4 times. In later releases, this technique was named to Frenzy, which is a little more appropriate for indicating what the technique does. Other things like many consumable items were renamed to better match up with items from Final Fantasy series of games. For example, tonics were later renamed to potions. Interesting. I just wanted to point this out, as a recent tweet indicated one of you would be playing the original SNES version on the Wii.
That's the good-looking one.
Yep. The good-looking port, you're saying, right? And the other is the latest version on the PC. Tim is going to have access to some extra side quests and dungeons, as well as a version of Frog who doesn't speak Shakespearean English. What a shame. I agree. Of all the people who doesn't get the Frog Shakespeare version, it being me, is ridiculous. But also, a lot of things in the game will have different names. You will probably find yourselves under some confusion as to what you are each talking about. Then again, if Olrox is in any indication,
you mean Olanax?
Olanax, Rnax. Maybe it won't matter anyway. That highlight clip in the last episode was hilarious. Just kidding, Tim. No, I agree with you, James. It was. Keep up the great good work and have fun with this one. I'll be playing along. Awesome, James. Thanks for the heads up. It's crazy that he literally says hundreds of. That's just.
That's a lot. Yeah. It makes me think a little bit about. Translation is. We've talked a little bit, I think, about it in the past, but localization is a big problem. That's hard to nail down, especially with the technical constraints of the day. Of course, later ports maybe found ways to work around that. I mean, there've always been multiple fan ports of games and things like that for games that haven't had an official translation, and they differ. One of those constraints is like character space that I already mentioned earlier in the episode, and how Japanese packs a lot more meaning into an individual character than we do. And so that can make translations very limited. But also, I think it points out with something like confusion changing to frenzy, which makes a lot more sense in the context which is described. Often localization was done kind of context-free. Back in the day, you didn't actually know how this one word was going to appear. And especially in, I can totally imagine, confusion and frenzy are sort of on a spectrum of meaning, you might say. And I can totally imagine that word in particular being, readily, you could see it being this, I could see that commonly being used as confusion. And without actually having the developers on hand to, or maybe even final code to play and see how it's used, you might just miss that the word you've chosen, the translation you've chosen, is totally wrong. And if nobody on the other side is sort of catching that the meaning is wrong, you'll miss out on things like that. There are definitely cases. I mean, Tacoma has a lot of, as a game that I actually saw some of the translation work being done, we would get questions back about particular phrases which were just odd. Like it was very unclear from the description. Like, I think there's a pickup item in that game that is a stretchy doll, that has arms that you can stretch, arms and legs or whatever you can stretch, like a Plastic Man or something like that. Mm-hmm. And that it was, I don't even remember what it was called, but it had some goofy name,
like Stretch Armstrong.
Yeah, something like that, right? But it wasn't that, because of course that was a real thing. So it was like, your putty buddy or something, whatever it was, and like getting a question back like, what is a putty buddy, or whatever, was really nice to be able to have. But that's not something that you normally would have, back in in the day, 25 years ago, often. So it's great. This is a rare game that's been translated twice officially, and so that's kind of interesting. I also had read this. I have Boss Fight Books, which is a series we mentioned quite a while back on the cast because we had email from somebody on it. That's where I actually learned the names of the two translators. They had a book in their first season of Critical Works by Michael P. Williams, which is on Chrono Trigger. So I'm going to try to read into that. I want to read it in such a way that it doesn't spoil me, but it's like a long essay about the game, and so I'm kind of looking forward to reading that alongside. I think it's from a player's perspective, so I don't think it's necessarily going to give fresh insights, but it might inform kind of our discussion as well. So I'm kind of curious if some of the things we picked out today will show up in there.
Yeah, I mean... Yeah. I think we've talked about this some off and on, but like localization is its own art form, and it's like any translation of text, right? Like the translator of like a classic book, from a different language to another language, that translator is a writer as well. I mean, they have to have their own sort of talent and skill and their own spin on things. And the localization companies have sprung up over the years, really good ones. I'm forgetting the name of the company, but there's one that sprung up out of some X1UP folks, and they all just moved over to Japan. They're all, I think almost all of them are American, and they moved over to Japan, hired folks over there, and they have a great team now. And they work with a lot of Japanese companies, and they're writers, they're ex-journalists and love Japanese games. And so, and they've probably localized some of your favorite games today, modern ones. But, they have to like make some creative choices sometimes even, right? Even if the context is there, they have to like make some decisions on things. And it's really interesting thing that being somebody who on various projects ended up having to be the one to sort of interact with those localizers, as Brett is saying, somebody would come back with a question or something in some of the games we worked on, and they say, well, what do you want to do here? It is an interesting challenge. And, it brings in different subtle meanings because of the cultures are different, right? Even if you translate it one for one,
I'm sure with like Republic Commando, like whenever we were working with Star Wars stuff, I know that stuff went back and forth for translation to Japan and even FFIX, or FIGS, I should say. Yeah. Of course, it was in English. FIGS is translation for French, Italian, German, Spanish. That would come back and go back and forth, and somebody would come by and be like, what is this? Somebody would ask. But then to add Star Wars on top of that, of like, oh, but now it's also got did this come from canon? Is this, was there something that's already been translated so that we don't mistranslate it? It's something different, or it's a whole, that added a layer of a can of worms as well. So.
Yeah, I just looked it up, and one sort of example that I want to bring up, apropos of nothing, being the theater nerd that I am, one of my favorite examples of sort of I guess I'm just sharing sort of my personal story about when translation became a big deal for me, and when I kind of fully grokked sort of the gravity of the difficulty of translating any text. Cyrano de Bergerac is a famous French play, and there are obviously multiple English translations of it, and then most
my
notably,
favorite is to Roxanne.
Right, I was going to say most notably for the modern era, Roxanne, the Steve Martin film is a adaptation of that, and the last line of Cyrano de Bergerac is a very famous line. I'll let people look it up. I won't bore people with it, but is a very famous line in theater in general, but of course every English translation has a slightly different version of that line. So it's one of the most contested sort of like weird arguments in the sort of super geeky theater translation world of like which line is the best one, because each one is artful because the translator, artfully translated it, but it's slightly different. In fact, even the Roxanne one, right? They
Right.
did their own version of it. So it's just a funny thing how one line like confusion and frenzy, can.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean,
so.
in that vein, I have a book by Douglas Hofstadter called Un Tombeau de Marot, which is a poem, which has itself, it's a short poem. This is not like some, epic. It's a very short poem. But translating it poses a lot of challenges because some of the translation, to really capture the sense of it, you can hear it in the title, that there's all this kind of rhyming and resonance of just an assonance, I guess you'd say, of the words, and so that's part of the problem. And, it's also, I mean, he's talking specifically about machine translation, which we, not to belabor it too much, but we basically do through statistics these days. Most of the time when you see this, it's translated this way as basically how something like Google Translate works. It just has huge amounts of data, but that's not going to be artful and really capture the sense of certainly of something like poetry or anything creative. I mean, it might be good for technical writing, which is repeatedly translated, in sort of similar ways, but it really is an art form. A friend of mine and I are reading Love in the Time of Cholera. Perfect book for right about now.
Yeah. Wow.
And she mentioned, I asked her, oh, well, who's the translator? And she said, oh, it's Edith Grossman. I said, oh, good. She's good. Because I know that Edith Grossman is a great translator of works from Spanish. So it's, just like, now I'm blanking on her name. It's Margaret something or other for Portuguese, so if you've read stuff in translation, you kind of gravitate towards translators, and that can change over time as well, so it's like something's translated 50 years later, something classical or something like that. There's a good Odyssey translation last year, that was a big deal because it was first ever translation by a woman, and it totally changed the sense of some of the things in it. Anyway, whole thing. Oh, it's Margaret Joel Costa. That's her name for the Portuguese. Anyway, so these things matter. So I appreciate James writing in and letting us digress a little bit on translation. I have one here from Warren Linham Church, whom we hear from time to time, called Learning by Failure. He says, in the interview with Jeff Morris, he mentioned playing a game with diehard players who would try out audacious strategies that were often successful. He went on to say that he thought that approach would be successful in Civ 3, either directly successful or at least teaching the player a clear lesson for next time. This got me thinking about the many times you two have discussed, quote, learning by failure on the podcast. I can't think of a game where purposefully trying out, quote, audacious strategies, or perhaps to put it another way, seeing how far you can push the rules, would be helpful. What is the difference between, say, a Mario 64 that gives you a sandbox to try out a new skill until you master it versus a Dark Souls type game? Neither will let you progress until you have a certain level of skill mastery. Is it just not having a, quote, you lose screen in between attempts? Is it just the amount of raw time you have to replay to try again? Neither of those feel fully satisfactory as an answer to me. Is this just like the amorphous concept of fun all games are trying to reach? Warren Linham Church. Well, I just threw that at you, so, please answer it in a complete way. So I do actually have a thought about the difference between those two games. And one is they actually have different skills in some ways. I mean, I think a Dark Souls game is testing your focus as much as your execution, that you're really, really focused on reading the other enemy, for example, so that you can counter its various attacks, where I think that Mario 64 is often more of a repetition because the burden of failure is often very low. It doesn't cost a lot to fail. So I think those are two different sorts of experiences, because with something like a Dark Souls game, it's like literally every enemy is a chance to fail. And what the game is testing is like your endurance of your focus and being in that moment. at every point. Whereas Mario has a lot more kind of fungibility of, yeah, sure, there might be little sections where you have to execute, and you might have a particular level that strings together a lot of it, or some of the stars in particular are difficult to get if you don't focus at that kind of level. But in general, it's kind of more of a playground of using these different special moves. So those are some thoughts there.
Excuse me. Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question. I don't know of how deeply I'll be able to answer it, but one, I guess, or if I'll answer anything at all, I think Brett's points were good there for sure. The only thing that's coming to mind, I guess, kind of immediately on the sort of topic of failure, and especially with Mario and Dark Souls, I think Brett's differences are really important to my point, is that I think, and then I'll rope it back around to Civ in a second. I think that the best games that allow you to utilize failure as part of the sort of play or playground or fun, as he was saying, are the ones that integrate failure into the loop on purpose. And so like in Dark Souls, for instance, because of the way bonfires work and the way that souls work and sort of what's at stake, like they've thought through how failure as a loop is going to be experienced by the players. And so it kind of takes on a different, obviously it's pretty harsh in that case. And I think I've said, I've only played Demon Souls, so I haven't played the more modern versions. I don't know where they go with it, but it sort of encourages you and discourages you in how to interact with failure. But to Brett's point, the mechanics of it are showing you what you're going to do to experiment. But then failure has a meaning rather than just a game over screen and then you reload, and I think that I have always appreciated the games that do take the failure loop as part of the sort of full loop rather than just having you reload. Mario, and I think a more modern example that people seem to bring up a lot is Super Meat Boy, where that repetition is just really built into the way that you play the game. It's just fast and you respawn and you're at it again, right? Like the sort of like loop of failure is built into the cycle of playing. And I think that in Civ's case, and this is something that dawned on me while we were playing the series, and then afterwards when I did a really pretty big deep dive into Beyond Earth and played many hours of that, quite a bit. The winning in those games, for me at least, is really not the point. In fact, it's very anticlimactic to actually, because they don't really celebrate it hardly at all. Like I've won in Civ 5, I think I won maybe all but one way. Civ 3, I did a couple. Beyond Earth, I did a couple. And so, like, yeah, they have a voiceover and they show some concept art or whatever. But really, playing the game is, it's the process, not the product in that case. And so like the experimentation and the failure loop in Civ is kind of the point in a way, right? It's like it's this crazy simulation sandbox where you're just fooling around. And I don't think they maybe as much as say Dark Souls have built in the failure loop into it, but because it's a game about the process, I feel like you're naturally not going to be as maybe upset when you go into an outlandish direction to try out a theory and then it doesn't work, because it will work sometimes, but even when it doesn't work, you're happy to get right back in there and start another game. You know what I mean? Because it's just like part of the process of the game. So that's the only. I
mean, they lean into it even, with something like Super Meat Boy or whatever. But
right. Yeah. So anyway, that's my random, not answering his question thought, but I like the topic of failure for sure. And I think Civ is an interesting, weird example of that question because it's such a different genre.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point. Is that Civ is meant to be more in the line of a board game, and you don't sit down at a board game expecting every time to win.
Yeah,
right. So it kind of comes from a different. Almost. Yeah, it's about interacting with the systems, and in fact, with that game, with the way they do difficulties, like you're going to get to a point where you probably you personally would have to spend an inordinate amount of time to get good enough to beat that, particular level of difficulty. For me, it would probably be the second, because I don't know. But yeah, I mean, it's yeah, I mean, you sit down to play whatever, some board game, and you're not expecting every time to win. That wouldn't be any fun for the people you play with, for one thing. It's just a different ethos, I think, when it comes to that game.
It's a constant, I mean, just take it from me. It's a constant heavy, deep design topic on every game I've worked on, and how failure is going to be dealt with. And like I said, there's the default, reload, throw up a, game over screen, reload, and have them attempt a thing, a level or whatever, or an encounter in exactly, essentially the same exact encounter. Just try it again until you get it right, because a lot of games are power fantasy based, and so you want them to have the power fantasy of vanquishing that boss or whatever. But when you think about failure differently, as like I said, kind of integrated more sort of holistically, it changes the way you think about the rest of the game, to be honest. Like, all the systems can really take advantage of that if you're thinking non-traditionally about it. And ultimately, a lot of times the traditional ways win out because it's what's known and it's proven, and people don't want to mess with the formula or whatever. They don't want to do something different. But maybe there's something to be said for the Dark Souls of the world or what have you, that don't that don't think that way, and you still get the power fantasy. It's just through the pain of going through all the lessons you've learned, but the argument there that is why we bring up that game so much is that the highs are much higher. The lows might be lower, but the highs are way bigger than maybe finishing an encounter in Doom, in the new Doom. Still great animations and over the top and amazing weapons and effects and blah, blah, blah. But I just lost this 5 times and had to reload. And so how many times does that take wind out of
Let me tell you about my Batman Arkham Knight experience, where every time you fail, not only do you, have to reload and watch several scenes, images or whatever that they load in, but also have a character who comes and talks to you dead on the ground, and says something witty at your face. Yeah. And you're just like, oh my God, the 50th time I've seen this character, laugh at me. Yeah. It's just, oh God, stop. You had to load this. You had to load this and play this to waste my time to rub it in before reloading whatever you're going to reload. Drives me crazy. Hate that stuff. And
that's taking the traditional model but making it kind of almost worse, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, no. I mean, it's fine the first few times, and then you're like, okay, this is just getting in the way. Anyway. All right, one last one. We might as well just go whole hog.
Yeah,
we only have you for a few more weeks, Tim. Let's just make these, 5-star run times, as they say on another podcast.
Haven't done a 2-hour episode in a while, but here we go.
Yeah, not since last week.
Was it? Yeah.
No, not quite.
Soren's was long. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, so subject is body part waving and interpersonal skills. Okay. From Moss, of course, Neotech Proto. Thanks, Moss. Hey, Tim and Brett. Brett made a remark during your feedback discussion on interdisciplinary communication, where he said that there are folks in the industry who try to assert dominance and wave their brains around by using terms that are deliberately obfuscatory. Obfuscatory. Yep. Thanks, Moss. Yep.
I also said that, I think, last week. But yeah.
In other words, people who try to confuse you on purpose to show how smart they are. And it made me think about how dealing with such people is its own skill entirely. Managing a group of people, or even just working within that group of people, where one or more comrades just don't play nice, can be exhausting and crippling to morale and or productivity. This is obviously true everywhere at every job, but can you two fellas talk about what you've learned over the years and how to deal with folks who are either unhelpful, obsessed with one-upping other folks, combative, uncooperative et al. And perhaps as a Galaxy Brain addendum, Have you ever figured out a way to recognize when you might be the one with the problem? Just a stray thought as I was listening. Thanks as always for a great podcast. Moss. Obfuscatory. Obfuscatory.
Yep. It's a tough one. So one thing I'm going to do is link. So yes, one of the things that I have done in the past when I've worked at places where I've seen this behavior was to take. I had a cork board outside my office, bulletin board type thing, and I took this paper that I took off the internet. It's kind of a famous one about this problem. I'm going to read the first paragraph from it just to give you a sense of it. And that was, I took it and I would put things on this corkboard that I wanted people to see, but I didn't want to individually talk to people or call people out. I would just put stuff up there. Be like, if you read this and recognize it, then do something about it. That was basically what I would do. Not to call out and be confrontational, just to like, hey, I'm aware of this problem. This may be coming up in the future. And people kind of knew this about this board. So I would sometimes put graphs on there about like this, how many people have broken the build how many times? It's like, 3 people have never broken the build. 1 person has broken the build 10 times, or whatever. So it's like, hey, if you're that one person. Okay, so the thing that I put out there about vocabulary was from a paper called The Turbo Encabulator. And I'll put a link to both the video and the paper in the show notes. Here's the first paragraph. For a number of years now, work has been proceeding in order to bring perfection to the crudely conceived idea of a transmission that would not only supply inverse reactive current for use in unilateral phase detractors, but would also be capable of automatically synchronizing cardinal grammeters. Such an instrument is the turbo encabulator. And the whole paper is this. It's like 3 pages of absolute meaningless but smart sounding gobbledygook. And it's given by like an IBM style researcher guy. You totally know the type. You'd see this video and you'd be like, I know that guy. Like I've seen this guy in a million, sort of technical discussions. So one tip is if you hear language like that coming out of your mouth, things like in order to bring perfection, you might be turbo encabulating. So it's a phrase I use. I actually think the encabulator might have been mentioned in Abduction. Remember the game we played after Myst that we played as a bonus? I think there's a thing in there.
A reference to that paper?
A reference to this paper, yeah.
Oh, that would be funny.
It's very fun. I saw it and was like, oh my God, the encabulator. Yeah, I mean, it just goes on and on and on, and that it could be about anything.
Right.
And so sometimes it's language that just is obfuscatory. But so that's a thing to watch out for. As far as a technique to deal with it, I've had people say to just treat it like a thing you don't understand and just be honest about that. And just be like, I'm sorry, I don't, you have to be kind of open to looking foolish or feeling like you have to overcome that fear, right? Basically that you'll look foolish. Because almost certainly if you don't understand, somebody else doesn't understand. I mean, you do that. You have a whole persona built around doing that.
Yeah, I was going to say that was the whole genesis of Caveman Tim. Yeah, it deflates and sort of like, right, it deflates the situation quickly, especially if somebody is really on their high horse and uncooperative, where they, you're self-critical or what's the term? I'm forgetting. Anyway, you're saying that you're an idiot, right? And to me that way, and so you're
self-deprecating.
Self-deprecating, right? That was the term I was looking for. And you're kind of putting yourself on, in a lower status place where they can feel like that they understand that whatever they're saying is not getting through, and they need to sort of, I don't know, quote unquote, dumb it down or something, And even though, obviously I'm not a caveman, but, I play one on TV kind of thing, and it deflates the situation, right? Where you don't, because for better or for worse, in my position on projects for many years now, I'm usually often talking to either a peer or some, or somebody who is below me. So there's already a sort of status problem there where people they already see me as a threat or something, right? Because I'm a creative director or something, right? So the people that Moss is asking about, right, who are combative or uncooperative, right? Not everybody, but like some people will see that there's a tension point there because I'm whatever, the boss or something. So I want to deflate that, right, and take care of that, and and make sure they understand I'm just another human. I'm just a person who we just need to know what's happening so we can make a decision and go to the next thing, right? It's not a big deal. Don't make this into a big deal. Caveman Tim I've talked about before. The other simple sort of like almost silly thing that goes with Brett's point, his technique about sort of like being open and honest and being okay with saying, I don't know what you're saying and I'm not as smart as you right now or whatever, is a simple thing. Probably people have told you all before, and it's probably on a sort of one of those cat posters or something. Is like what I usually do, my simple technique in both for myself. He asked a question about when we recognize if I'm doing it, but also for the people who are being combative or trying to one up each other, is I keep asking simple questions back. You know what I mean? And you kind of like, in a way, I will say it's definitely, there's a bit of passive aggressive that going on there, but in a way you kind of chip away at their sort of like bravado or exterior by just keep asking questions, and Caveman Tim's part of that, but also just like, and not complicated questions, just like, okay, what do you mean by this? Okay, what about that? Okay, and over like 3 to 5 questions, you will have broken down their exterior without them almost even realizing it sometimes. I'm giving away a major tool that I use for anyone who I've worked with.
Oh, I know.
But to his, I think, excellent question about how do you recognize if you are one of those people, I will use the same thing on somebody else. If I get an inkling that they're seeing me as the combative one, I will ask them a question about like, wait, so what we just talked about, did I say this, in a way that you understood, or am I messing something up, or, you know what I mean? So it kind of goes both ways, but simply like ask a bunch of questions to sort of like distill down and simplify what they're getting at. And essentially, like, unless they just are so combative, they're just not going to answer you and walk away. If they're going to answer it, they're going to naturally start simplifying it and lose some of that bravado. Anyway.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, I think that's really good. I mean, that's really kind of almost an active listening sort of technique. I mean, you're repeating back, except you're repeating back with questions. Like you're repeating what they said up to the point you don't understand, and then saying, okay, but yeah, I lost you here, is a good way to do it. As far as recognizing when you're the one doing it, I think that's something you can learn to do by reflection. So by reflection, I mean by thinking back on a conversation you've had. I actually had this happen recently. I was in a position that I wasn't normally in. Just to set some context. So I was speaking from a different sort of authority than I normally have. And I said something, and it was particularly difficult to recognize that there were people who weren't on the same page with me, because some were. It was a group conversation, and like half the people listening were getting what I was putting down and half weren't. And I kind of took all that and understood, okay, I got that through. And I started reflecting back and was like, oh, but somebody said something like, well, how are we going to actually build that? It was somebody who didn't understand. And so reflecting back on it later, in the evening after the conversation, I was able to go, oh, they think this, right? They think this other thing. So I missed, I meant we're just going to write this in some text. They thought, oh, we actually have to do art for this or something like that. And reflecting on that, I was able to say, oh, okay, I need to circle back. And the next morning I said, hey, you didn't get what I meant by this, did you? You thought we actually have to build X, Y, or Z. And they're like, yeah, I thought that's what we're doing. I was like, no. For me, that's just like, there's some systems underneath and some numbers. And what we tell the player is happening is this, and that's just in text. And like those two are not related. And that person then got it. It was like, oh, okay, I feel a lot better about it, etc. So I was able then to sort of, from that reflection, be more aware of it in future conversations, right? I mean, that's how you learn, right? As you look back, like, hey, this didn't go as well as I had hoped. And maybe I can do that more in the moment in the future, just by being very present and being very aware and having experienced it. In the same way you can sort of, pre-think yourself through a problem. But all of it really just like you can actually think, okay, I'm going to go have this conversation. Here are some concepts I'm going to use. That's often very hard to do, though, unless you're going into a particular explicit type of conversation, like a review or something, which is very different. What if they react this way? You can sort of role play it out. So I don't know. I think a lot of it just has to do with being open and aware of what you're getting back. As leaders in particular, we have to go and be very, very aware of what we're getting from the people we're talking to, and using that to inform how we proceed. And that requires, honestly, some vulnerability. I mean, like you point out, the Caveman Tim is really just kind of a position of a humorous way of being vulnerable about, I don't understand. And I think that that's really important. So, same thing with, if you're in a position where you're explaining something, to be vulnerable enough to say, hey, you know what? I may not be putting this away you understand. So, hey, just tell me. Like, I really would rather know that you don't understand than to come away from it, knowing, thinking that I've communicated when I haven't. So, yeah. So, a lot of stuff there.
Who knew we were gonna hit that stuff? Good questions.
Yeah. No, they've been great questions. Love that stuff. Thank you for all of your email.
We're doing 2 episodes in one these days. So, two for the price.
To bulk up before you go out on the trail. This is the podcast bulking up while you bulk up.
All right.
Actually, I guess you bulk down. I don't know what the hell you're doing.
Trying to bulk down.
Carry less, but you gotta get yourself ready.
Yeah.
Anyway, those were sent to devgameclub@gmail.com. Thank you so much. It has been a while since we've had a review, so I'm going to throw that out there. If you want to throw us a review on the podcast app or the any app, or whatever listening device that you use, if we don't read it on the show, it's probably because we haven't seen it, and let us know. Otherwise, we would love to have some more reviews. So by all means, get those out there if you haven't in the past. If you have in the past, thanks so much. So next time, sir.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
We are going to play to the Magus' Castle.
Okay. To it?
To it.
Okay.
Yes, to it, not through it.
All right.
That's all I'm going to tell you. We've already encountered somebody called the Magus. Well, I don't know that we've encountered the Magus. We've encountered a time in which the Magus has been important, I should say.
Yeah, I feel like maybe they referenced the Magus.
The Magus is who was defeated in the past.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So we're going to, I guess, get to the Magus' castle, which is a little bit of a spoiler, but, what are you going to do? If you get there via the overworld, I guess just save outside. I don't know. I haven't looked into detail. I was just like, this looks like a good place. But but something like that.
You seriously did not have like an fully animated anime intro movie for the game that's like, looks like a cartoon.
I don't think so, no. But I'll go start it again just to make sure I'm not crazy.
It's just in the later versions, like James said, maybe, or I forget if it was James. I don't know, maybe they added it later, but it is elaborate. Like, it is a long, almost trailer-like. I'm going to go watch it again, but I have a prediction that it's sort of like highlight moments throughout the game, so it's a little bit maybe spoilery.
Is it like an attract mode type thing, or?
Well, but it's like watching a anime. It's like kind of like attract mode, but it's, I guess sort of, but it doesn't look like the game at all, right? It looks like a,
is it with like the little?
It's like watching a Dragon Ball episode.
Okay, I've got my stream up, and I'm like, did I just like not pay attention to this? Because it's possible I totally missed it, or just don't remember it, and it just didn't register. No, I'm just getting like I remember this. There was a little bit of attract mode with like some flying city castle type things looking.
It goes all over. I mean, it's like, again, it's kind of like a trailer. Anyway, we'll talk about it.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I did. It's sort of like over the opening credits.
There might have been credits. I forget if there's credits. There's just a lot of action.
Yeah, so for me, it's an attract mode. I don't think it's at the beginning of the game.
Oh,
I think it's a thing that happens if you idle at the opening menu.
Yeah.
Like before I was picking the battle mode and all that stuff.
It's not pixel art, though. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, in that case, no. No, that's something you have. I had nothing that wasn't pixel art.
I'll find a YouTube video and send it to you then.
Yeah, okay.
Because
we need to talk about that, apparently.
Well, I don't know. When I start the game, literally, that's the first thing you see. You know what I mean? So it's like it's meant. I don't know why they did it that way, but it's at least in the PC version, it's meant to be like an introduction to the game or something. But it's not. You know, it's unlike anything else in the game because it's a cel shaded cartoon animation anime. Anyway. Well, there you have it.
Yeah, no, I'm literally watching it stream behind you talking, and it's just a top-down view of the city, and then it's my mom waking me up.
No, it's not. No, I'll send it to you. I'll find it. I'm sure it's on YouTube someplace.
I'm sure it is. All right, that's very cool. That's wild that they probably added it. I mean, you have other content that I don't have, so because you're playing on the PC.
Yeah.
Okay, well, and I guess that brings us to the end. What do we normally talk about? So you can find the podcast on Twitter at... That's all right. No, we're 2 hours and 15 minutes in. I'm just lost.
Yeah.
At Deb, where you can also find my co-host at
Tim Longo Jr. with the JR at the end.
I am off Twitter, but you can find me streaming most nights at twitch.tv/Brett Duville. I've actually recently finished Arkham Knight.
Oh.
And have begun my next game. The voters, the listeners, the watchers, I don't know, whatever, the people participating, had a choice between Metroid Prime 2 and Bloodstained, Ritual of the Night. And they chose Metroid Prime 2.
Oh, interesting.
So I'm currently playing that on stream weeknights, and on the weekends, that's when I catch up on whatever we're playing for the cast. So you can find me there. Anyway, thanks so much for joining us, and good night.
Good night.